Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me Ruben Romero, who has written several comics, including Infari and the Agency, and DG Speirs, who has written the Triangle series, the Tao of Mod. I might say that wrong to some degree, and also the novelization of the Agency. So, welcome back, Ruben, and I'm so happy to have you here, DJ. DG. So, I'm glad. So, how are you guys?
I'm good. Ruben, are you good?
I'm as good as I can be.
Well, as I stated, obviously Ruben knows how this all works and how we're going to talk about the agency and some other stuff. And I think the
Okay.
best place to start with all this, because DG, you wrote the novelization to the agency, is what
Mhm.
is the agency? And I know, Ruben, we've gone through this a few times now, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page before we start diving into some of the more finer details.
Well, Ruben had to give me his one sentence pitch for this when we first met, and basically it was Harry Potter meets Mission Impossible. So that in itself was intriguing enough. The agency is basically the story of the International Agency of Magic, a an organization dedicated to keeping magic in order in the world. And it's their first major challenge as an agency, as an organization, is the story of the agency.
Yeah, and this is all based off of the first five issues came out very early on, I think in
Mm-hmm.
2015. Then you took a break, and then issue six was just funded on Kickstarter, which continues the story. And so obviously this thing builds out a lot more in the comic format. And then at what point did the idea for the novelization come about, and how did the two of you meet? Because I think that's fascinating.
Well, we first met at a Comic Con. I cosplay an author. I cosplay George R. R. Martin when I go to these things. So that was when he was living off of Game of Thrones stuff. And he never did finish the next book. So, but I ran into Ruben at Comic Con at a comic convention, a small one in Tampa, and that's where I first got introduced to the property and absolutely fell in love with it at that point. Fast forward to a Tampa Bay Comic Con about a year and a half later. And at that same Comic Con, I had spent a long conversation with an author by the name of Kevin J. Anderson. If you were familiar with novelizations and stuff, he's worked with DC on a novel based on uh, Superman's dad, um, and a fascinating man. I spent an hour and a half picking his brain about approaching and playing in someone else's sandbox. I turn the corner and there's Ruben and his whole gang over there, and he's talking about this, and it suddenly occurred to me: if you go and look for novelizations of comic books, you'll see a ton of listings for DC has done novelizations and Marvel has done novelizations. But a small indie book, I couldn't find one. I couldn't find anything of a small indie book that had been turned into a novel. And I liked the story, so I asked Ruben if I could play in his sandbox, and he said yes. We had some interesting adventures along the way getting it out the door, but it was fun. I don't know if Ruben can tell the story of the novel, wishing he had the novel sooner because of a certain uh, possibility of moving the project into another realm, and that hopefully he can go back now with what I've given him.
So,
Yeah, no,
so
it's
yeah,
always
yeah, please,
fun
Ruben.
to kind of yeah. Let me just chime in real quick because I do love that memory of me and I. He's Don to me. You can call him DG all you want, but that's Don to me. Don, like our relationship, a lot of people would, you put us next to each other and people probably wouldn't think like, oh, those two can't possibly be in the same like way on the same wavelength. And that couldn't be any further from the truth. We do seem to love the same things. We Whenever we're around each other, especially in those cons, when we would have those conversations, we would both get kind of giddy and excited about possibilities and doing things and approaching, just our own projects. And we would pick our own brain, each other's brains about which way to go and what we were doing. And when it came down to him wanting to play in the sandbox with the agency, like I couldn't think of anybody else better who I would want to do it. So he's not wrong when it comes to wanting the novel, a lot sooner, because we did have opportunities. Like you said, we released the first 5 issues rather quickly, in about within a year and a half. And we had a lot of, right out the gate, a lot of accolades, a lot of opportunities that were afforded to us, such as the pitches at Image, the pitches at Netflix, that we just weren't prepared for. All we had was a comic book, so now having a novel based on those 5 issues, having Don kind of go in there and build out the world that we kind of laid the foundation for, does give it legs to be able to go into these meetings and say there's a larger world here than 122 pages of comic book. There's a big world in here. So to me, it's just one of those things where it's like, why not continue building on the franchise?
Yeah, and to even go off of that, because novelizations provide more explanation, because there's only so much you can do in a comic book, especially when it's an indie book, and that you don't know how long that indie book is going to last. Because when you first publish The Agency, and I don't think I'm saying anything wrong here or anything infactual, you don't know if that book is going to take off. You don't know where that book is going to land. You don't know the interest in it. And The Agency did take off. But first issue and second issue, and I would even imagine all the way through the fifth issue, you're like, how did we get here to some degree? And because that response isn't guaranteed. When it's a big company, they have other means to guarantee certain receptions. And so when you have the novelization, and I think this book is like 414 pages, I want to say. So it's a big one. You have a lot more time and a lot more tools to explain what's happening and dive into the world. So what was that entire process like of taking 122 pages and certain things got brushed by rather quickly and providing a lot of context and a lot of more information and explaining something that maybe was missed or you just didn't have time to explain in that position? And how much did you know about the world also? I'm curious, when you were
Well,
writing all this.
in terms of approaching this, the first thing I did was, of course, I read the book, and then I reread the book, and then I reread the book again. Then I started picking his brain about certain things that were alluded to but not actually shown. One of the things is that there's the old saw, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, I tried to give each picture 1,000 words, but part of it is you'd see an action and then you'd see another action, but those two didn't necessarily connect. And so I have to figure out what the heartbeats in between that snapshot and that snapshot are. I have to figure out, you have this guy who magically appears in a puff of smoke in the first version. Why is he so mad? I have to understand that with that character. I have to understand the relationships. There's only so much that they can do in terms of relationships and that with the characters. But he gave me enough of the sketch of what's going on with those characters that we could go from there and build them out in conversations. They already had, from the comic books, unique voices, and it was easy enough to do that. At the same time, I have a complete notebook about that thick, filled with questions that I had, such as the 23-day gap that he left me with. So it was a lot of fun having the bad guy say, "Okay, we're about to take over the world," and then have a 23-day gap before they did anything. So I suddenly got to figure out what were the bad guys doing in that 23 days. So
Right, because fun. In the comics, like you said, and like we know, there's only so much real estate. So our first 5 issues move at a neck breaking pace. where it's just like one thing after the other. But in reality, time is a real thing. So as much as you like to address it, or even ignore it in a lot of cases, um, you have to account for that in a novel. Why? Because now you've got a lot of real estate to play with. So now those 23 days become important. And what did those 23 days mean for characters like the Harus? What were they doing? What was it like for Damien? What was it like for Riley, who was just recently picked up? What were those first 30 days of being, almost feeling sequestered, by these agents before he starts to develop relationships with them. So and then that gives DG the time to and the opportunity to not only create moments and real live events that happen and that exist in our world, but he also gets to do things like invent other agents in parts of the world that might have not been seen in our book, in the comic book. So there's just a lot of room to play. That's why I really love the idea of novelization. I find it extremely intimidating, and that's why I never approached it. So having DG come on board and say, this is something that I want to do, that was a welcome, like that was a gift from the gods. Like that was like somebody likes my story enough that they want to come into the sandbox and play. And, it's probably kind of the way George Lucas feels about Timothy Zahn, back in the old Star Wars EU, where he was like, man, that guy gets me. That guy gets the voices. That guy gets the characters. And that's something that Don has had from the moment that he started this. He knew my characters inside and out. Matter of fact, and I'll point this out, and now you can go back and read the comics. I have my agents go to London, and they're driving a vehicle in London. And Don was, I've seen this book a million times. I
Well, I
have
know where this is
VCR,
going.
I've seen it 100 times. And Don says, "Hey, Ruben, you've got Remo driving in London, but you want to take a look and tell me what side of the car the steering wheel is on?" And I was like, and I go and I look, and obviously it's on the wrong side, right? So it's those things that in the moment, as a creator, when you're moving at that comic book pace, you don't pick it up. You don't pick it up, or you excuse it away as like, oh well, they brought that SUV in their plane. You know what I'm saying? Like they brought it from America, so it's an American SUV. That's why they. But the truth of the matter is that that's probably not it. If they landed in London, they were probably met with a caravan of vehicles that were that are from there, from that side of the country, and they should have the steering wheels on the right place. So that immediately like made me feel like, what, like even now this gets even better for me, because now I'm starting to second guess my choices about what I'm doing, and I'm even more careful about what's on the paper and inside those panels, because now I'm thinking about Don's going to get the next 5 issues and he's going to break them apart. And if I make another bonehead mistake like that, then he's got to account for it and fix it for me. So I don't, I want to make his job easy and fun, so.
Well, I mean, one example of that, using the London example, on the way back from London, the IAM team gets ambushed. Okay, great. It's somewhere in London. What I had to figure out was I had to sit down with a map and figure out how to get from point A, basically Westminster Palace, the bridge there that gets destroyed, Big Ben that gets destroyed, how they get from Heathrow to that location, and then where on the road back is the appropriate spot for the bad guys to have tried to ambush them. So I got very familiar with all sorts of roundabouts and everything like that in the countryside, and then it was fun playing in that part of the sandbox, because we got to see Paul on his home turf, and we don't get to see a lot of what happened from the end of the fight till they get back on the plane. So I got to create whole cloth that interstitial there. So we got to see how each of them would deal with waiting for the cavalry to show up after they'd beaten the bad guys, but were still not going anywhere because their vehicle was in pieces strewn about the countryside, and how they would prevent someone from seeing their vehicle strewn in pieces across the countryside because it had been attacked magically. And that part of their thing is to keep bad people from knowing there's bad magic as well as good. So how did they do that? And it was always fun to work with. One of the characters that one of the situations with this book, rather, in the continuity, was coming into I think it was at the beginning of the fourth book. There was this flashback scene for Embry, who was the head of the agency, and it basically tells the story of how the agency gets created and also how Embry gets himself into his particular pickle. And that one of the things that was fun out of that was I was able to take a minor character from that and turn her into something much more down the line, giving this character a relationship with Riley and possibly making it so that she can appear further down the line with this. So it's fun finding those little nuggets they're already seeds that Ruben and his team had planted. It was just me finding them and watering them so that they sprouted into something that was hopefully fun to read.
And let's talk a little bit about that because, and this is for both of you because I'm very curious. So obviously, DG had a bunch of questions for Ruben and then for what you've written and the agency that was not answered. And obviously, that was needed to build out the world and for the novelization. And then you obviously had to answer some of those questions. And so, what was that like to actually go deeper into your world? Because we've spoken about having a Bible, and I don't mean the religious one. I mean, for those who don't know what a Bible is, when you're a writer, is kind of having the secret sauce and all the components and the parameters of your world and everything inside of it. And so, what was it like having to answer questions? Because I'm sure you had some answers already, but I'm sure you didn't have some answers. And given that issue 6 was coming out, I don't know the full extent of where issue 6 was at this point, but that heightens your ability to write and going forward with issue 7, 8, and 9, and 10. Because I think you're doing at least another 5 with this, so that makes you question the world and further develop the world and have a better sense. And then obviously the seeds are planted. So what was it like seeing things that maybe you missed? Because we spoke about writing privately off the air about how we could take the exact same concept and we have 2 completely different outcomes to that concept. And we spoke about it with a comic idea, and we were having an amazing conversation maybe 15 weeks ago about that. So what is that like for both of you?
I mean, for me, answering the questions for him weren't hard. It's really about, honestly speaking, like, for me, writing is a collaborative process. I try to um, I try to make this thing a team effort. You know, from the beginning, even with the agency, when I first started it, you know, it was with my ex-wife, it was with my best friend. It was never a one-man band type of thing. So sitting down with DG and answering questions about the world actually helped me kind of get my mojo back for the agency and really like get the gears turning in terms of what the future could hold. Actually getting the book and reading it for the first time in my hand, which again I just finished like a couple of days ago. Um, it gives me juice, man. It, like, you know, it gives me life. So it's one of those things where it's almost like having a product and reverse engineering it. So you kind of like get to see what you've done, but then another person comes in and does something else and builds on top of that, you know. So you get to kind of go back, and you don't really gotta have to figure out too many things because it's all like Lego pieces. It's all connecting. He's not he's not breaking the rules, and he's not making Victoria his Victoria. No, it's my Victoria. He's just adding to her. So to me, it's like there's this beautiful thing, like these inner monologues that she has in the book, and the way that she kind of calms herself down and kind of puts herself in order and puts a game face on that Don did, you know, that I didn't see, you know, I didn't have that in my head. All I had was this woman who had sacrificed. I know something about her that readers don't know yet. So I knew she had sacrificed a lot. I knew she was strong. And I know that she's a woman in a man's world. So, but internally, I wasn't thinking about her internal mechanisms, and Don did. So it's one of those things where it's like, and I kind of nod to that and I put that in issue 6. You know what I'm saying? Like the countdown and the, like her trying to talk herself off the ledge before she explodes into her power, right? And lets her power take over. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's, I inform him and then he informs me. And it's a pretty symbiotic, like a symbiote. I don't know the word if I'm
Iron
pronouncing it
sharpening
right.
iron is a good way to put it.
Right. Iron sharpening iron. Exactly. And like you said, we had our trials and tribulations. I'm not, by all means, the easiest person to kind of nail down sometimes. And I deal with my, I deal with my own, mental health issues and, things like that. So sometimes I don't, working with me is not the easiest job by all means of the stretch of the imagination. Like it's not easy. So for him to continue to stay connected and stay engaged, that to me just makes this project even all that much more sweeter, because leading up to this, there was a lot of rocky road, and not the ice cream. So it's just one of those things where it's like, long story short, I loved answering the questions because iron did sharpen iron. He made me a better storyteller.
Yeah, and it was the questions were important for me because one of the first things that I did when I approached this was not my book. All right, this was my interpretation of his book, and I had to stay true to his vision. So I could add curly Q's and dot some I's and cross some T's and that kind of stuff, but the core story is Ruben's. And if I don't stay true to that, if I go wandering off somewhere in the woods somewhere, then the book's not right. And trust me, I went wandering off in the woods. This was 7 drafts to get this done. And it still came out around 414 pages, about 100,000 words in this. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And one of the things is that in asking questions of Ruben and seeing that thought process go on with him, it was always fun when suddenly the lock turned for him. I mean, his eyes light up when the lock turns for him on something, and it's fun to go through that creative process with someone as well. So I was just thrilled to do this again, and I'm still doing this. Him and I are still sharing ideas because one of the things that I'm looking at, honestly, is volume 2. I'd love to novelize do the novelization of volume 2 as well once we know where that's going. So and it's fun. And part of it was I got the sneak peek because I had to put the little coda at the end of the first book, so I got a kind of hint of where he was going with that. So
Yeah, and I kind of want to ask about that too, because this book deals with issues 1 through 5, and I don't want to say it's a companion because it's the novelization of it, but they work together well. Where there are certain things that if you read the novelization and you read the comic, you're going to get a broader sense of the world. And so, what was that like, knowing that issue 6 was coming and leaving it open for issue 6, and also having to throw in things in there that relate to issue 6? And I think issue 6 has been sent out at this point, right, Ruben?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, that was definitely something that needed to be done. The book needed to have um, that button scene, so to speak, that after credit scene, where we kind of allude to what's coming next. And what's fun about that is that really all I had was an idea of Tevel, our main bad guy, recruiting somebody who's almost just as powerful as he is, but who is on this plane of existence, and who can effectively bring him in without him having to go through the trials and tribulations of trying to turn Riley, which was his first intentions. He kind of thought maybe I get him into the agency, I get the old man next to him, and the old man kind of plays Sheev Palpatine, sort of, to Anakin Skywalker. And that immediately doesn't work because Remo immediately kind of has like this feeling like something's wrong. Obviously the sensor senses something. So he doesn't know what he senses, but he's immediately turned off by the situation. So he kind of, he tasks Miles to him and he keeps an eye on him. He wants to keep a close eye on him. And then Riley is just now eager to learn. So now you've got this kid who's just coming into his powers. So now he's looking for this father figure or older brother figure. So now the thought of turning him doesn't work for Tevel. So now that's where kind of, the Harus have their own, their own game that they're playing. They don't want to so much play with Tevel. So now going into issue 6, Tevel needs somebody who's on the same page as him and not a snarky, loudmouth like Damien is, who is just his go-between, his do-boy. He needs somebody with power to help him achieve, what he needs. So that was my idea. And now that I know where issue 6 is, has finished, and now that I know that Don is interested in going on and doing a second volume, now I'm thinking of like, how do I avoid those 23-day gaps, right? How do I give Don the freedom to have fun and create his own moments, but how do I avoid 5 or 6 drafts? How do I lessen his workload so that he goes in and he's got more of a complete story and he's only got to fill in or do some wandering in the woods, so to speak, on certain things that he might want to, say, hey, Ruben, does this work? Or, hey, I had this really great idea that builds off of this that you did in the book, but, it could really work in volume 3 if we plant the seeds right. So now it's becoming like, oh, how do we cohesively tell this story together where it is not a companion, but just more of a build out, like you got this Lego set here, but if you go buy this other one and you connect them, they're both the same piece. You're just getting more pieces in it. You're getting more characters, more story, different layers. So, that's always fun. And now I get to kind of work my scripts through him too and be like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. What do you think? Like we just recently had, I would say about a month ago, after I wrapped up the Kickstarter, we had a hour-long conversation on Zoom, on Skype about just that, about the future of where I'm going to go with the project, and yeah, I'll let him tell it too.
One of the funny things is that in the course of doing this, Ruben has left me with so many wonderful breadcrumbs. For instance, this is, at first, I think Ruben he had this whole idea of a governmental agency for doing this, but then he went and named it the International Agency of Magic. Well, I'm holding him to that. If it's the International Agency of Magic, it's not like the CIA. It's more like the World Health Organization or Interpol or something like that. In other words, it's not just U.S. based, it's worldwide, which means that has implications. Well, one of the implications is magic doesn't necessarily work the same everywhere. People have because magic comes up through society, and that the Japanese have a different magic system than Western tradition does. I hint at it a little bit, but I've got 2-3 chapters of that are sitting on a cutting room floor that I think I might try to work into some sort of one shot for him, which is a story for him, which is how when the Horse were out there doing their things in those 23 days, how different parts of the IAM responded to them and stopped them. And that, I mean, if you're looking at Japanese magic, well, gee, their whole concept of five different magicians based on different elements, right? Something that you see throwbacks into in Power Rangers, believe it or not, actually goes back to Japanese mythology. And that. So what happens if the Magi in the Japanese system actually were kind of like Power Rangers, but not quite? So how would that work? And I ended up writing like 2, 3 chapters on that, and then said, wait a minute, now that's off the beaten path. But it's something that I've shared with him, things like that. So it's fun doing that. I mean, one of the things that I came up with was people are going to react badly to magic happening and causing damage to non-magical people. Well, in my society, in my history, when I've seen that happen, that's your X-Men scenario, which is people turn against mutants, people turn against mages. Well, there needs to be a way to keep the mages safe. Anyway, I came up with the idea that you can transport, but how do you transport someone on a regular basis? In Japan, they call them tori. We call them gates because that's the translation. But you walk through a tori, you end up somewhere else, and that. So it's those kind of breadcrumbs that he's left me all throughout this, and it's so much fun expanding outward on those. It's like sourdough, for lack of a better description. It just keeps growing. So
Yeah, I think that that's something that the novelization lends itself very much to because you do have more real estate. And also in a novelization, and Robert Kirkman was speaking about this, where what you have is that in comics, in many ways, the reader can set the pace. So you can
mhm.
determine how fast somebody's reading it, or how fast they're speaking, or their actions, or you can determine how fast a character is speaking, or what voice they're using, or what tone they're using. And also, the left and your right side of your brain work in conjunction. It's one of the only mediums that does that. While with a novel, you have to set the pace. It's just the nature of the medium, and a movie also sets the pace. And so, having all those little tidbits and all those explanations does set a pace, and it does add a lot of context, and it does add tonality to it. And so, I kind of like hearing this, and knowing more about the world in general, I think is awesome as well with all of this. And so, what was that like? Because obviously, when you novelize something, you're trying to maintain as much of that comic as you can, but unfortunately, comics do allow the reader to have a lot of control, and
Mhm.
novels don't. Just by the nature of how they're set up.
Well, it had to pass his muster. It had to. If you couldn't see, if I'm doing my job wrong, then his thread gets lost. And that was number one was his. You could see his throughput. You could see my curly cues every once in a while there, but they didn't get in the way of the through line that he created with the brilliant comic book to start with. So all I did was I just filled in a little gap here, filled in a little gap there. So turned it from a painting to a sculpture.
He's being modest, but the truth of the matter is that it takes a lot, man. Like you talk about just script wise. If we look at the amount of dialogue that is in those 5 issues, the story, how condensed it is, in terms uh, of story. Just again, neck break pace all throughout the whole thing. The agency is my Michael Bay's Transformer. It's my popcorn movie, right? So that's what the comic book is. The novel slows it down. The novel builds on top of it. The novel gets into the nooks and crannies that I could not get into. That at the end of the day, us comic book creators and they say it all the time, from the big two to indies, is you know we let the reader determine what goes in between the panels, what happens between the panels. You got to connect that. You got to make those. And the novel, like you said, the novel doesn't leave that. The novel sets the pace, and it tells you what is going on, and it builds on top of all of those moments. And that to me is what's amazing about it, because I look at the graphic novel. And what's funny is when I finished reading the book, I turned around and I read my comic, and I read the 5 issues, and I was just like, wow, I this is the world, this is the whole world right here. And working with somebody who understands that, and who wants to come in and put his stamp on it, but also respect what came before it and what made it, what it is that he's sitting down and trying to adapt. That's a, because you hear horror stories. I mean, you look at you look at novelizations that get turned into movies, and one big one for me is Ready Player One. You read Ready Player One, and then you watch the movie, and the movie is the popcorn. The movie doesn't really have a lot of soul,
A rough
but the
one.
book,
It's a
but
rough
the
one now.
book, but the book moves you, but the novel moves you and makes you feel things. So it's like, where this what I'm loving about this particular Kickstarter is that now people are getting their hands on the book and they're getting their hands on the comic, and I'm kind of waiting to hear back from people to see how they feel, and like I'm waiting for the questions of like, hey, how come this wasn't in the comic book? You know what I'm saying? Because the book is that good. And there are things like the Tory, like the Gates, that like Victoria's inner monologues. Those are things that I'm gonna end up having to pull because they work so well. You know what I'm saying? That they just really fit in what the agency is and what the agency is all about. So to me, it's like it's all one big, just connective tissue, that puts this world, standing firm on its own 2 feet. And again, working with somebody who respects that vision and who understands that vision, um, is a plus.
Yeah, and I'm about to mention somewhat of a dirty word, but I think it's the best way how to describe this is sort of Harry Potter, where the definition and the detail that Harry Potter goes into, especially in the Goblet of Fire when they're being transported in during that Quidditch game, I think in a lot of ways that's what, because that's the first thing that popped in my head when you're mentioning all this information and how this works, because understanding how magic works and your magic and how all that is in play is so crucial to, and then it adds an element to it. And I am also very curious because the book is new, and then obviously COVID hit, which kind of slowed things down, and then getting things into people's hands is a bit complicated. And also, you haven't been to any cons, so you don't have any first, personal experiences, and I don't know how many people are communicating with you on the internet with it, but I think that's something that is very much helpful to the book, and having all that background because it provides massive context, and then I think context is going to only benefit this comic series in a lot of ways. And I know it's somewhat of a dirty word with everything that's going on, mentioning Harry Potter and everything. And
Harry Potter is not a dirty word, bro. I am, I love Harry Potter. Um, Not to go off into a tangent. Do I wish that J.K. Rowling was, exhibiting better quality traits as a human being? Sure. But there is, and I'm gonna bring it up right now because I shared it the other day. There's a new show on HBO called Lovecraft Country. I don't know if you've had a moment to watch it.
have
Um,
not. I will be the first to say it. It's just on my list, but obviously, for those who don't know, and I'm going to give a reason why, I have 5 interviews this week, and I'm doing something tomorrow night, and I'm watching a wrestling event, and my week legitimately has been booked. And it's been arguably the most busy week of my entire year so far. And so clearly, and next week is not much better. So it's going to be a while. So nobody ask me any of that in my DMs, please.
um,
You have an hour between 3 and 4 in the morning. You can catch an episode or two, right? Come on.
get up at 4:30 in the morning. Maximize your day. No, but there's I don't want to ruin it for you, but in the pilot episode, the main character Tick, who's African American, is riding on the back of a bus with another older woman, and the bus breaks down, and the white passengers are picked up by this guy, a mechanic from the town, and they all get to ride on his truck, and Tick and that woman who he doesn't know have to walk into town, and he's carrying, I believe it's John Carter of Mars, um, which I think goes by another name. I don't know the name. The name of the novel escapes me right
The
now.
first one is Warlord of Mars.
Warlord of Mars. So I think that's what he's got, and she's like, oh well, what's the book about? And he tells her, oh, it's a Confederate general who gets abducted, and he becomes like, he's got to fight for the Princess of Mars or whatever. And she's like, oh, the Confederate general's a hero. And she's like, I don't like that. She's like, you shouldn't like that either. And he's like, what? And this is the line. He says, stories are like people. Loving them doesn't make them perfect. You just try and cherish them and overlook their flaws. And to me, that line, I immediately sat up in bed and rewound it and was like, what did he just say? Because I thought it was a brilliant piece of writing, because we live in a day and age where we immediately cancel people for something that they said or did. And we immediately stop watching, stop buying, stop. And I get it. For some cases, these things make sense. But Harry Potter taught me what it meant to be empathetic, what it meant to love, what it meant to have cherished friendships. Like, for me, like I tell people all the time, Star Wars is my life, Harry Potter is my religion. You know what I'm saying? Like I look at that, like I look at it that way in a lot of ways. The lessons that Sirius and Dumbledore taught me, even though they were written by J.K. Rowling, those don't go away just because her issues. You know what I'm saying? So Harry Potter's not a dirty word, for me at least. I still love it very much,
The
and
reason why
it
I
is what it
mentioned
is. But to answer your question, like, yes, I think having that combination of combining the comic and the novel, the way that the Potterverse has been able to grow between Pottermore, the movies, Fantastic Beasts, and the novelizations, all of that just works to the benefit of the world. The only problem is that I don't have to do the things that she's had to do, which is go back and retcon a bunch of stuff. Like now with Dawn, it's almost like the beginning of the stages. Like, we don't have to fix anything. Like the other day, I think I sent Dawn the issue 6, the script to issue 6, and there's these 3 characters that I'm introducing, and he mentions them in the novelization, but they go by different names. I had renamed them because I had lost the script and I had to write it from scratch, and I had just thrown the names in there. And he was like, oh, we can go back and that's an easy fix. But I was like, no, no, no. And I went and I made sure that before I sent anything to my letterer, that I had changed the names to the original names that he mentioned, because I don't want to go back and retcon things. Like I want to, if the least of our worries is where the steering wheel was on what side of the car, then, those are minor things. But like names, storylines, like what he was saying, those through lines, there can't be too much, wobble, wobble, shake, shake there, because then it's not, then it's not sturdy. Then it's not, cohesive.
Yeah, I think we're gonna table all of that there. Obviously, you already mentioned that there's going to be a part 2 to the novelization, or book 2. I don't know how we're gonna call it and all that. Maybe volume 2 if we get there. Sticking with the graphic novel themes, that's going to cover 6 through 10, and I think that's the direction we're going in. And that's a little far off, I'm assuming.
Jesus Christ. If he gets me the scripts, I'll start working on it tomorrow. So. Actually, I have another novel that I'm in the process of. We're finishing up the final draft on. But once that's done, then going back and working in that sandbox again, I'd love to do. So
I want to table Ruben for a little bit and give DG an opportunity to promote some of your stuff, because you work on other projects as well. You've done the Triangle series, which has very much a comic book vibe to it, where that's following 2 people who sort of are cursed and have horrific luck. They sort of experience murder in their family, and then lo and behold, that murder kind of kills one of their boyfriends, the girl's boyfriend, right in front of them, and then the plot unfolds there. And so there's a lot going on with this. There's a prequel that's sort of an offshoot, but then comes back into it. Then there's a sequel. And then there's like a secret vault book that goes through all like cool magic and technology stuff. So what is this series about, briefly?
What, the Triangle series?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the whole idea behind Triangle was sitting there one day and wondering, we have all of these things that we hear about, that technologies and stuff like that. What if there was somebody who had to figure out a new technology, what's the worst possible thing that it could do, and then have to figure out the way to fix it, and know that in advance, so that when that technology got out in the wild and someone did something stupid with it, they would have a way to stop it from being stupid. So you put a bunch of scientists into basically a lab and say, okay, come up with your own doomsday scenario. Then come up with the equipment to make that work so that you could create doomsday. And then come up with the way to break your own equipment without breaking your equipment. All right. And that was the start of this. The other thing is that I've always had a fondness for people who have special abilities, so I mean I'm one of those people who believe that there are certain things that could be seen as a superpower, but actually have a logical explanation to them. Right? Once you understand that logical explanation, you can see that applied in a real world scenario. And that's one of the things that I did with Steve and Amy, who are the two protagonists, the hero and heroine of my novels. I mean, they're oil and water in the first novel, completely. I mean, but they both end up finding out that they've got a common foe, and end up getting recruited to work together by these people who break things, so to speak, because someone's stolen one of their ideas and is planning on using it. And the funny thing was that when I thought of this idea, it was 10 years ago when I first started working on that. And the basic concept behind it was, what if you could take and modify any stream of data anywhere in the world in real time? What would the implications of that simple statement be? Well, let's see. One of the things is you could create a video using someone saying something that they didn't really say in their own voice, and broadcast it out over what they were trying to broadcast, and it would appear perfectly legitimate. We have that happening now. I thought of this 10 years ago as a doomsday thing. People are doing this now. And half the people who are doing this, people go, well, isn't that cool? And I'm sitting there going, hell no, that's not cool. That's dangerous as hell. Why are we not figuring out a way to identify those instantly so that we know someone has manipulated that? We don't know for sure anymore. So you could use something like that to, say, interfere with real-time surveillance of nuclear sites or things like that. Or you could change the stock market numbers in real time as they're being reported. Well, if you figure out the choke point on that and introduce the data, your own data stream at that specific point, you can manipulate markets. It's all sorts of things like that. So it's fun coming up with things that people can do like that, and figure out the ways to create doomsday, and then figure out the ways to break someone from creating doomsday. That's what Triangle does. So.
And there's a bunch of story stuff around this. There's obviously the prequel that then is called Rescue, that's dealing with Steve beforehand, and it's sort of like a one-shot, but it's relevant. And then there's the sequel, Wild Card, that further dives into all of this. And I don't want to ruin any of that, because I think you sold your book perfectly well just there for people to go out to buy it, which I would like people to do. If you like what you heard, please go buy it. And then the other project I want to talk about, and it's way more fun, and that is the Tao of Mod.
Oh, yes.
And so I have to tell a story where I, for my first semester taking American Sign Language, signed one of the My Little Pony books in sign language. Now, before anybody asks, I don't remember any of it. I should have filmed it. It was C+ at best. I had to take sign language for a reason to get down to DC and study abroad. But that's neither here nor there. And this has got everything. It's got an element of disability into it, inclusion, spreading positivity. You speak a lot about My Little Pony. You're sort of a My Little Pony expert in many ways. And then it also deals with Zen philosophy. So what is all of this? Because clearly this is the opposite side of everything else.
Let me give you the background on this. At a Comic-Con in 2014, someone who was a friend of mine, we stopped and we sat down at lunch. And she said, you're a writer, that kind of stuff. You know what you would really like? My Little Pony. Now, I'm in my mid-50s. I've got a big scraggly beard. I mean, I'm going to go near My Little Pony as any other guy who go at my age would be going near My Little Pony, as a potential to be a sexual predator or something like that, or to be seen as one. But she challenged me, and she said this: if you can get through the entire first season and you don't like it, you don't find anything useful in it, dinner at Ruth's Chris is on me. And I went, I can taste those mushrooms already there. Well, I got through about half of the episodes, and then I came across the first season. And one of the things that I noticed is that someone who's a friend of mine, a lady by the name of Charlotte Fullerton, you might be familiar with the name. Dwayne McDuffie was her husband. And that, but Charlotte and I have got an ongoing communication relationship back and forth. And I noticed that she wrote for the first season. I went, Charlotte Fullerton is writing about candy-colored ponies? This can be interesting. Then I came across an episode called Over the Barrel, I believe is what it's called. It's about 10, 12 episodes in. And the through line on this is simply this. It deals with the dislocation of native peoples by the expansion of settlements into the West. And I went, this isn't a show with candy-colored ponies aimed at 6 to 12-year-olds. Someone was thinking way outside the box with it. And at that point, I got hooked. And then this was when I was just watching the show. This was before I found out about brony culture and that. I admire the show My Little Pony. What they were doing in the first three seasons was amazing. They got away from it a little bit toward the further down the line they got. One of the reasons why was they decided to abandon the EI label on it. The argument behind it was, as I found out later from one of the writers on the show, Amy Keating Rogers, was that it enabled them to tell stories easier if they didn't have to worry about meeting that EI code, which they had the perfect thing for that, which was have the main character write a letter back to the princess, the head princess, and tell her what exactly the lesson she'd learned. 60 seconds, re-emphasizing what you were supposed to get out of this. When I ran into brony culture, it was a completely different animal, and that it was mean and nasty, for lack of a better description. And then a month after I got involved with this stuff, bronies bullied a young disabled man in England into committing suicide. And I had been toying around with starting the Tao of Mod as just an interesting idea. One of the episodes in the early in the second season was a character introduced a character called Maud Pie. If you're familiar with the main 6 characters that they call them, Pinkie Pie, who's one of them, who's the avatar of laughter, all right, is basically someone ADHD off their Ritalin who's just been given just mainlined like five pounds of white refined sugar, and that bouncing off of everywhere. So they introduce a character who's going to be your sister. Everyone expects her to be the same. Not. Flat affect, answers every question directly, applies only as much effort into answering the question as is needed to directly answer the question, and that's it. Blew me away because I figured out this is a Zen pony, an actual Zen pony who follows the idea of Zen Buddhism. And so I got the idea of having that character just putting out little pithy sayings. Then I found out about the suicide, and I went, how would be a different way to approach this? And the idea that I came up with behind it was to do a daily post, but to organize each week's posts around a single character and what attribute they represented. So, attribute of laughter, or honesty, or friendship, or generosity. And it turns out if I started going beyond the original 6 that the creators identified, and start looking at how other characters are presented, I come up with about 53, 54 possibles out of that. So I had a year. And I did it for a year, and then another year, and then another year, and ended up doing it for 5 years. Quotes that basically identify with a characteristic, 7 each week, new characteristic the next week, identified by the character that they fit with. The Tao of Mod book that's behind me over there is year 2 of that, showing each of the posts and the original quote it was based on. So I think I did a lot of good. At least I hope I did a lot of good. I tried to put out positive messages through there. But it was an amazingly sophisticated series in its approach, and that I wish the fandom had been kinder. A show that's all about being kind and gentle and in the spirit of friendship and all that kind of stuff has a fan base that's among the nastiest, backbiting folks in the world. So, never understood that.
Unfortunately, that's how it is with a lot of shows, and the shows that are the most violent have the nicest fans, and we're all in it together. So go figure that one out.
Okay.
It's really opposite, and it's messed up on a lot of levels, at least in my experience. And so, before I bring Ruben back in and we talk about COVID a little bit, where can people find this? Because I don't want to go too deep into this, because I think people reading this and going through some of this stuff, it's going to be really helpful in their life, and it's really positive.
Now Mod will be back on Amazon again. I've had to resolve some issues with the fact that I created all of these characters and all of these ideas and characters and everything, and didn't talk to Hasbro. So, I'm playing in their sandbox unlike with when I talked to Ruben, getting permission ahead of time. So it's been a situation of resolving that. The book was up for a while. It'll be back up. The print version of the book is expensive because it's expensive to produce. I honestly recommend people downloading the ebook version of it, and it'll be on Amazon. Look for DG Speirs. Last name is Speirs. If you look there, you'll be able to find the book. So.
And now we're going to change gears because I don't want to push any further. I own stock in Hasbro, so I don't want to push any further. So it might be a conflict of interest here. But anyhow, let's talk about COVID, because me and Ruben have spoken about this twice now, right? Twice.
Yeah.
And so obviously I didn't expect it to be what it was. I don't think anybody did. And that's not political. I thought it was going to be 2-3 weeks at the most. And obviously it's changed, and we've seen multiple conventions be canceled. San Diego is a big one. Emerald City Comic Con is a big one. New York Comic Con is now canceled. And I think all those are the right decisions. But a lot of authors go to these cons. Ruben, I know that you've gone to New York Comic Con, and that's kind of what kicked off the agency. So how have you both been affected? And Ruben, you've answered this question like 9 times for me.
Yeah. The answer hasn't changed. It hasn't really affected me in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, being stuck at home, working from home, raising my toddler, it's all been an experience. The Kickstarter was a big question mark. I didn't know if that was going to make it. But Kickstarter does its due diligence, and they were very, very clear on their website, during COVID that interest in projects had increased. Funding for projects had increased. So that kind of calmed me down. So I put it out there and it worked. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that people could jump on and get all 6 issues, which is something that hadn't been done before. We had gone straight from issues 1 and 2 right into the trade, because we had gotten that deal with Diamond. So we went straight with the trade. So that was the thing. And then having the book, having the novel available for physically and a PDF version of it, I think it intrigued a lot of people. Like Don said, there's not a lot of indie books out there. I think we might be the first one that has a novel to go with its comic book. So I think it was interesting, and I think that COVID's actually, it not only has it put a chink in the armor in terms of just like everyday life and stuff like that, but it's also put us in a situation where we are home and we need things to do. And how many times are you going to binge Stranger Things, or some other show that you've seen, or whatever the case may be. So having a project that you can back, that you can feel like you're a part of, I think is a good thing. And then having it come to your house where you don't have to go out and get it, and you don't have to worry about any of that, I think is a good thing for people. So in a lot of ways it stinks because I miss my con fam, and Don says that he cosplays an author, but he forgets to tell you that he becomes this guy. Okay, he becomes George R.R. Martin. He becomes Stinky Pete from the Toy Story franchise. These are he becomes John Hammond from Jurassic Park. I personally don't cosplay. I live vicariously through Don. So when he cosplays, I'm like, I wish I was out there having fun with him. So I miss those things. I miss being in front of my table, because I'm never sitting behind it, except unless I'm eating lunch or something. I miss being out there in front of people, shaking hands, talking to people, getting them excited about my project, getting them to spend a little bit of their con money on an indie book, and not another signature from Norman Reedus. So it's one of those things where it's like I miss that world, and I can't wait to get back to it. But I'm enjoying it because it's I listened to a podcast called Script Notes, and they were just talking about, Craig Mazin was just talking about how this has been like a writer's dream. Like normally in Hollywood 10 years ago, writers would have been told to stop. They would have been like, that don't do anything, just stop. And now with streaming and the way that the Mandalorian is shot inside a void, in what they call the void inside a studio, Hollywood is evolving. And now writers are even more in demand. So I find myself not only working on my comic books, but working on spec scripts. I'm dabbling in an idea for a book. I've never sat down and written a novel, but I'm thinking about it.
I don't write comic books.
And to even talk further about that, and I know that DG, you could jump in on this too. So obviously Hollywood is evolving, and we're seeing Netflix is a part of that, Hulu's a part of that, Quigley, I think it is, Peacock, obviously, Amazon, and there's a few others, and obviously also regular cable in many ways as well. And I think comics are evolving also, and we're starting to see some stuff change in the comic world. And I had Travis Gibb on. I don't know, do you know Travis? And yep. Travis, what he was saying, and I don't think he's going to mind me saying it, that because of COVID, this was the first time indie ever had a leg up on the big guys, because indie was pushing things out. And then I sort of had a controversial person on, Mindy Wheeler, who sort of agreed with the premise a little bit, but said it's up to indie to maintain that leg up now with pricing and all that stuff. And I think Mindy has a really good point, and Mindy's coming at it from a comic shop owner position. And so I'm just curious how you feel the comic world has evolved, and even the writing world to some degree has also evolved in that way as well. So I'm just curious on both of your opinions on that.
Well, personally, for me, I didn't find social distancing any different from what I normally do in terms of writing. I go hide in a room, type on a keyboard, or write in a longhand and that kind of stuff. It's a pretty solo thing anyway. So, but one of the fun parts about working on the agency was the chance to be collaborative, all right, with Ruben in that. In terms of what I'm seeing is, even this was even before COVID, was that there's been an absolute explosion of outlets. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is that with it's like drinking from a fire hose at times. I mean, I'm sure your own experience with it is trying to keep up with, where do you pay attention to? What do you look at? Because there's just now so much
What do I
to
buy
look at.
is the question. What do I buy? Because I'll even go further into this. So I'm a big wrestling fan. So I actually only have a certain amount of subscriptions. So I have a Netflix. I have a IWTV subscription. I have a Crunchyroll account. I just cut. I used to have Sling and I cut that. And there's only so much I can consume and so much I can buy. And so that's part of the reason why I'm debating if I should, get that HBO Max, which is Lovecraft and all that stuff, because I have more than enough content to consume, as well as I'm a content producer in many ways. And this is going to be the biggest month I've ever produced on what I've done. And I think after this interview, I think like 13 days left, and those days are getting filled up really quickly. And so I agree with, there's so much content, and there's so much decent, if not great, content coming out. So I'm just curious.
What your job, as far as what I see, my job's just to produce. I'm the human equivalent of 50 monkeys in a room trying to recreate Shakespeare, right? But your job is to curate. Your job is to look at that fire hose stream going by and going, that's good, and that's good, and that's good. And your selection that you will do out of that will be different from someone else's selection. But you're one of those people who people will look at and says, he knows what he's talking about.
Great.
So it's
I have
worth paying
responsibility
attention
now.
to.
Right.
So that's your job, which is much more important than you think about. Than you're not just an aggregator, you're a connoisseur. And as you're curating what people should pay attention to, all right, you will continue to build upon that. So that's at least where my thinking is, that if people like you who curate these things, right, because a museum can't have everything. You can't slap up everything on the walls. You have curators at museums who go, this painting goes with that one. This painting goes with that one. And the four of them together tell a through story. I mean, you talking about wrestling reminded me of this little fact. When I was growing up with wrestling, we had wrestling. We had the WWF, not WWE, WWF. All right? Now, it's like there used to be one boxing organization. Now there are hundreds of boxing organizations. There are dozens of wrestling organizations. And you trying to keep, I'm assuming you have a spreadsheet somewhere with different pages for each of the different wrestling organizations, just to try to stay up with everything that's happening. It just gets that complicated. So
a little bit, and I'm a little ashamed to admit it.
Way when it comes to, curating. Well, I mean, not curating, but in terms of, like, for me to be creative, I need to feel inspired, right? So for me, I try to read as much as I can, whether that be comic books, novels, and I try to consume as much as I can. So I do find myself up late, past midnight, sitting here with the subtitles on, volume down to like 6, just watching and reading and like taking stuff in and taking in this new content, because again, how do I compete? Right? These are the people who eventually I want to be running alongside with. So I'm trying to see, like HBO Max, has this brilliant sci-fi series called Raised by Wolves that's done by Ridley Scott, where it's totally out of the box, like nothing I've ever seen on television. A story that is probably not very accepted in most parts of the country, in terms of like, religion and atheism and things like that. Like the base of the story is very, is a very touchy subject. But I find it brilliant. And again, it's one of those things where like I have to continuously consume so that I can go out there and say, okay, I got to raise my bar, right? I got to raise my bar. If I show you the stack of comics that I have, to read right now that I picked up in the last few weeks, like it's just indie, mainstream, all come from different corners, different writers, different kinds of stories. But again, I'm going out there doing my homework, studying my peers because I need to be as good or if not better. So that for me, that's why I say, you know, make the time. In your case, Andrew, you have to go out there like Don says, and you're curating. You're watching all of this stuff happen. You're meeting new creators. I love that interview you did with Mike because I set it up with you and Mike Tenner for Black Jackets because I put you two in contact. But it's like these are people who deserve the spotlight. And like when I first started out, I remember, me and Bob Sally, who's the creator of Broken Gargoyles, and we did Three Swords together. And he also has Salvagers. Like I remember when he was it was just him. It was just him on my Facebook, who was like the only other comic book creator that I knew. And that was starting in 2014. And now you fast forward to 2020, and I've got nothing but comic book creators. Every post, everybody down my timeline is a creator, an artist, a colorist, a letterer, or a novelist. So that is my circle now. So it's all one giant circle of life, to kind of quote the Lion King, because I consume and then I go create. And then I create and somebody consumes that and they go out and they create. So again, it's just one of those things. And Andrew, you're just Rafiki, bro. You're bringing everybody together and letting us tell our story. So we appreciate it.
Andrew, I got a question for you. Are you ever afraid you're going to miss something?
You know what? It's weird where I used to be, and I'll tell a story. So obviously, I have sort of this is not my full time career, and I am invested in the stock market. For those who don't know, and obviously, I got a lot of other stuff going on, and even in comic books, I dabble in buying and selling comic books. And I used to be scared that I'm going to miss everything. But what I've learned is that if I miss something and something leaves, there's always something else out there that is just as good or better. And that I'm like, oh, I missed that, or somebody else beat me to it, and now it's been, for lack of a better word, totally saturated and exposed. But then I go and I find and say, oh, okay, there's 9 other people who are just in that same caliber. And then I'm like, oh man, they also deserve a spot too. Because for those who don't know, and this is very public and I don't talk about it, in order to get an interview, and when I first started doing this, and this segment is brand new, as of 6 months ago, got a lot of rejections from a lot of talented people. And I still get rejections from a lot of talented people. But now I figured out that I shoot something up in a Facebook group and all these people come to me, and now I get to choose more or less. And so now I actually have the exact opposite problem. And then also, Ruben was saying he makes recommendations, and a lot of other people do as well, to me. And that also is extremely helpful. And so that's where I'm at with all of this. And now that I'm a curator, which I never thought of myself as, I just thought of myself as an interviewer. But that's good too. I'm going to put it in my resume right there. But yeah, it's weird where I figured out that there's so much talent, and that I guess one of my things, and I don't feel bad about it, but it's kind of frustrating, is that I wish there was like 9 of me, because there is so much talent and there are other people doing this, but there's not enough of us. And I welcome the competition, and I wish that more people stepped up like me, and I wish I knew more people who were doing this like me. And unfortunately, I don't. And it's very weird for me in that position. And so that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And
Well, that's maybe in along that same lines. I wish that there were more people who could see the possibilities in marrying words with pictures in terms of doing novelizations of indie books. It's one of the things Ruben and I had floated an idea of possibly for before the apocalypse hit us here, of doing a panel at Tampa Bay Comic Con about playing in someone else's sandbox, turning an indie book into a novel, doing the novelizations, what's involved, what's not involved, right? What you have to, what pitfalls there are, and that kind of stuff. And maybe getting others, writers or comic book artists or something like that, to think, there are other ways to tell this story than just with pen and ink and coloring and lettering. So that's all I ever did in this is I took his story, I just retold it, but it's still his story in the end.
yeah, I agree, and I wish that there's more of that too. Because when Ruben told me about the novelization a little while ago, and I never heard of an indie book being novelized. I've heard of somebody writing a novel and then it being done as sort of an indie book and an indie project, but I've never heard of it being done the other way around. And I think it's so fascinating. And I honestly think with everything that's going on with Kickstarter and Indiegogo to some degree, that this is the next step in many ways, where we're now seeing celebrities in on Kickstarter, and we're seeing big comic writers on Kickstarter. I mean, Keanu Reeves just is pretty much gonna breach the 800,000 mark, and I'm not too sure if Ruben's happy or not about that, but maybe the music didn't play for you and Bill and Ted. I don't know.
No, listen, man. I love Keanu. He's a wonderful human being. I've never met him personally, but everything that I've ever seen from him, he's a shining light. He seems like a very humble dude. He's a fun guy to watch in movies.
You're
But
a cool
there's an article
dude,
going
and I'm a
around.
cool
There's an
dude.
article going on around right now about that very topic. Is you know, do the big two, and people with money like Keanu need to be going to Kickstarter. But you know what? At the end of the day, like I try not to wreck my brain on that stuff. I just think it's funny because I feel like Keanu probably has enough money to put out like 12 compendiums of whatever story he wants to tell. He's got the money. He's Keanu Reeves. He could literally dial up any artist in the world and work with them. So like to me, it's like it is what it is. For us indie guys, man, it's a struggle because it's like we're not only competing with Marvel and DC and Image and Boom and all these other people. We're dealing with actors and people who are now looking at comic books as a viable way of telling the stories that they want to tell, and they're using Kickstarter and Indiegogos and things like that to do that. And I think there's room enough for everybody. I'm not Aaron Burr. I do feel that the world is wide enough for all of us. But I just feel like at the end of the day, if I could do it on my own, if I was in that position to where I can create the agency without having to go to Kickstarter and make things happen in a certain way, I would do it. I would do it, and I would use my platform and my name and my money in different ways. But again, Indiegogo, Kickstarter is a really great way for these companies to measure level of interest. They can say, well, maybe this project isn't going to do so hot. Let's see. Let's see if people are interested in it. If they're interested in it, they'll back it. And that's kind of like their barometer right now. It's kind of like the pilot episode, for TV series. You get the pilot, and then you might get one or two after, and the ratings don't go so well. The network cancels it. It's the same thing. I'm guessing now. The comic book industry, whether it's indie or mainstream, that's what they're doing. They're going out there and testing the water. So I don't hate it. I find it funny, because it's like at the end of the day, did you really have to do that? I mean, you're
It,
Keanu Reeves. You could just literally say, "Yo, I'm Keanu Reeves. I've got this comic book coming out," and people are gonna go buy it. You know what I'm saying? Like Keanu, we're sitting now through 4 John Wick movies. I don't think you know, like there's not a connection problem. We're there with you. If you put something out, we're gonna support you. So, it is what it is. More power to them.
I think to even reiterate that, I've been very open about saying Kickstarter, all these platforms are open to everybody. I'm very much a open capitalist guy, meaning that you throw something out on Kickstarter, and if people want to buy it, I mean, I don't think that that's the issue. And I think it's bringing a lot of verification to Kickstarter, but I don't know how far that verification is going because 6 years ago, Kickstarter was not a verifiable source. It really wasn't. Back 2014, it was okay, but it was somewhat shady. And fast forward to 2020, it's pretty professional. And I think most people agree with me on that.
Yeah.
So I don't really know, and I get both sides of it. But again, I don't think that, and I'm not a comic writer, so I can't speak for everybody in this sector. And my word should not be taken as much as somebody who is an artist or an indie artist or an indie comic creator. But I do think that Kickstarter is for everybody. Also, Kickstarter and Indiegogo don't just do comics. And
Right.
so that's part of my position on it as well, where there's podcast technology on Kickstarter, and that doesn't affect comics at all. But I do get the arguments on both sides, and I think it's going to be time will tell. I think that that's what it ultimately is that how does the indie comic community respond, especially not going with Scott Snyder coming in or Keanu Reeves or Charles Soule and Ryan Brown just had a project that was very good and funded successfully, and Jeff Lemire is on there, and a few others are now coming. But what happens in 3 years from now? Because the box has been open, and well, whatever happens, everybody in the community is going to have to live with it. Is how I view it. And so, on that note, and we've been talking for a while now, I do want to give both of you an opportunity to promote yourself. What are your social medias? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, websites. Where can people get the agency, the novelization of the agency? And I know, DG, you have a bunch of other books. Where can people find that stuff?
Well, you can find my books on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, things like that. They're all out there. They just have to look up DG Speirs, Speirs. The website is dgspeirs.com. And that I'm on. I've got a Facebook page. I got a Twitter account, and that's it. I'm too old-fashioned to do Instagram or TikTok or anything else like that. So I could probably think up things to do with those, but I would spend all of my time creating content for Instagram and TikTok rather than in front of my computer typing and working on the next draft of that. So got the agency books out there. Got Delve Mod will be back out sometime in the next month or so. And that the Triangle books are out there. We're looking at right now. The next project is a young adult novel called Hex. That's all I will tell you about now. We'll talk again about it some other time. So I'm going to try to get Ruben to create a comic book around it. So, and that. And thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Let me tell you, now all I want is a DG Speirs TikTok channel. Like, I think I'm gonna have to take it to Twitter and get a hashtag going. But no, you can find me anywhere on social media. I actually changed my social media names to Ruben the Writer. I thought that was very original. So I just recently got allowed back into Twitter. I was banned for speaking my mind to our president, which I do a lot on Twitter. But other than that, you can find me on Instagram, Ruben the Writer on Twitter, Ruben Romero on Facebook, and you can find we just got the agency Three Swords and in Fairy on Spinwiz Comics that is ran by Jeff Palumbo, which is an alternative to Comixology. So Comixology is kind of like the largest, if you're a comic book digital person, you know what Comixology is. I don't need to tell you. But Jeff has created a wonderful product, just as engaging and easy to use as Comixology. With Spinwiz Comics, it's got an app for both Android and iOS. You can also read it from your tablet or your laptop. and you know, the price points are great, and it's all indie books. You're not going to be swimming through Marvel or DC or Image. It's all true blue indie titles. So make sure you guys check that out. Spinwiz Comics. You can find all the books there. You can find some on Comixology. Although I am slowly but surely pulling stuff off of there, just to kind of focus on Spinwiz. I should have a website launching in the next month or so. My little brother's building it out for me. He's also the president of my family's company, so he's a little busy, but you know, little slowly but surely got that going. And yeah, I've got two projects I'm working on. One, I'll do like DG just did. I'll just hit you with the names. One of them's called The Illusion Witch, and the other one is called Stay Safe Out There. And they're both comic book projects. And I've got artists for them. Got an artist team, and yeah, I'm working on that. And of course, the agency number 7, 8, 9, and 10, and obviously book 2. Me and Don will be discussing very soon, and hopefully we'll be able to get that out to you guys.
And I will just throw this out there. So Casey Bowker was supposed to be on yesterday, and that got moved to next Thursday. And
That guy's so flaky, man.
And so, yeah, he's the flakiest of the flakiest, and he's rather plastic, and that's code for something. And so people looking back after we conduct that interview are going to get the joke there. But Inferi, which you worked on also, is up.
We're working on Inferi 2 right now. Yeah.
Is up, and you can get the first issue on his.
I'm actually in it.
Yeah, Don is actually in the book as a comic book character in the book.
And
my
name is misspelled too.
Yeah.
So
I just gag between us. He can't spell my name right.
I always switch the E's and the I's. You know, it's just I'm always doing it. He's like Ruben, you did it again. But yeah, and Fairy 2's working on it now. We're working on it now. We've actually Rodrigo's just sent me. It's funny that we're talking about it right now because he just sent me the layouts for the cover. And I can't wait to take this to Kickstarter. I really can't.
So having said that, and I don't want to ruin too much,
yeah,
Casey's Kickstarter is going to be launching relatively soon, and then obviously that's Thursday, and we're doing something cool with that. And one of the perks is to get Inferi. And that's why I bring it up, because if you like what you hear, I'm sure Ruben's going to say a little bit more about it in 1 second. That's a really good way how to get it, and you can get it really inexpensively. I think you can get it for like $5 in digital format. So plus Casey and a variety of other books. And so I want to give everybody an idea here that right now with COVID, money might be tight. There are really cheap ways how to get into a lot of books right now.
Yeah, no, I think, that's becoming the trend. I'm loving what I'm seeing. I belong to a Kickstarter group of indie creators who were all, Russell Notley is, I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, but Russell, he does Ichabod Jones. And
Ichabod Jones is up there. He was on my show.
And he's such a workhorse. And he's got this thing called right now, the Fundle Bundle. And he's got volume 1 of the agency in there that I put in there with him with a slew of a bunch of other creators. And yeah, now Casey and Chris, who hosts Don't Forget a Towel, and who is, they're good friends of mine. We met at New York Comic Con. They've got a book, Pursuit of Plastic, coming out. The Kickstarter.
You're ruining all my stuff, man.
So I'm just, but they've, I'm sure Inferi will be in there as well.
It is.
Reward.
It is.
So yeah, we are, me and Casey, Chris, DG, all of us, Mike, Russell, I think we're all, this kind of like this new wave of indie creators who are just trying to do things different, man, and trying to make enough content out there to ring the bell and show people like, hey, if you really put the work in, you can put it out. So it's interesting because it's just us following our dreams and just doing what we want to do, and it's pretty awesome that you give us this platform to talk about it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap this up. And I've been saying it with every interview that obviously you got to go support indie. if you see something you like, and there's two great creators here with me right now. The agency is Ruben's baby, and now it's in novelization format. And then if you like DG Speirs writing, there's a variety of other books that you could pick up, and that's all on Amazon. Ruben's got a bunch of stuff out there. Obviously, Spinwiz Comics is where a bunch of this stuff is at. I think I said the name right. And coming off of Comixology, so if you're interested in Comixology and you want to go down that route, sooner rather than later, that's right there. And if money is tight, because COVID has derailed a lot of stuff, or you're concerned about your finances and you don't have the money, then one of the best things that you can do is follow people on social media. It means so much. And I know when somebody follows me on social media and they like a tweet of mine, or they like my Instagram post, or they say, hey, I really like your work, or oh man, I'm super excited. It means so much. And it is so inspiring when people do it. And I would imagine for the both of you, when you get that response, or you get an email that says, hey, just read the agency, it means so much, I really enjoyed it. It just makes you want to write more, and it makes you feel good, and it's just a positive thing. And that's just as valuable as going out and picking up and spending money and supporting, especially in today's world with everything that's going on. And if you don't do it, there's no excuse anymore. And the only excuse that you can have is if you don't have electricity or internet. And if that's the case, please call me, because I want to know how you're watching this. And secondly, I love technology, and there's a business opportunity here for us to both make money. So please get in contact with me, because we will both make money with this new technology. And believe me when I tell you, it's just knocking on the door. But that's the only excuse to not be supportive in any fashion.
Well, I hate to point this out, but you can read a book without the internet or electricity.
That's right.
And now my dreams are crushed. So we're going to end on that note.
So,
and we're done.
Admittedly, it's low tech, but yeah. So, and with that, I wish you both, gentlemen, I wish you good night.
Have a good one.